4:58 a.m. The Arabian Peninsula. Pre-dawn. Temperature already 81 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. A dry, windless darkness that carried the particular smell of the desert at night. Dust and heat, and the faint petrochemical undertone that hung over this part of the world like a permanent signature. The sky to the east was beginning to show the thinnest gray line where the sun was preparing to assert itself over the Gulf. Another ordinary morning at the center of the global energy economy, at Abqaiq, the largest oil processing facility on Earth. A sprawling industrial complex in Saudi Arabia's eastern province that processed roughly 7% of global daily oil supply, more than 7 million barrels every 24 hours, through its gas oil separation plants, stabilization columns, desulfurization units, and pipeline distribution infrastructure. A facility so significant to the global economy that its destruction or serious degradation would send energy markets into convulsions measurable in hundreds of billions of dollars per day. A facility protected by Saudi Arabian National Guard units, Patriot air defense batteries, and a series of passive defenses installed following the September 2019 drone attack that had temporarily taken it offline and shocked the world's energy markets. At Camp Arifjan, Kuwait, 31 miles south of Kuwait City, the largest U.S. Army installation in the Middle East outside of Qatar. Home to the 1st Theater Sustainment Command, significant pre-positioned equipment stocks, a logistics coordination center that supported operations across the entire CENTCOM theater. And on this particular Tuesday morning, approximately 4,300 American service members going about the beginning of their duty day. At 4:58 a.m., both facilities were struck simultaneously by the opening wave of what the IRGC's Aerospace Force had designated Operation Desert Veil, the most ambitious drone campaign ever attempted by any non-state adjacent actor in the history of aerial warfare. The IRGC had spent 14 months preparing Desert Veil. The weapon system at its core was not a single drone type, but a carefully layered combination of 4 distinct platforms, each assigned a specific role in the attack architecture. First, 216 Shahed 238 jet-powered loitering munitions, faster and more maneuverable than the Shahed 136, flying at Mach 0.8, had been pre-positioned at 7 dispersed launch sites across Khuzestan Province, Fars Province, and the islands of Abu Musa and Greater Tunb in the Persian Gulf. Their mission was saturation, overwhelming the Patriot and Shorad defenses at both targets through sheer numbers. Second, 44 Arash-2 kamikaze drones, larger, carrying a 150-kilogram warhead, had been assigned to the specific high-value aim points at Abqaiq. The gas oil separation plant number 1, the main stabilization towers, the main control building, and the primary pipeline manifold. Third, 22 Shahed 149 Gaza reconnaissance drones orbited at altitude above both target areas, providing the IRGC's Aerospace Force Command with real-time battle damage assessment imagery and targeting corrections. Fourth and most dangerous, 18 Hoveizeh cruise missiles, long-range, precision-guided, with a 500-kilogram warhead, had been pre-assigned to Camp Arifjan's command infrastructure, the pre-positioned equipment storage yards, and the facility's power generation complex. Combined, 300 Shahed, 238 loitering munitions, plus 44 Arash, 2 weapons plus 22 reconnaissance drones, plus 18 Hoveizeh cruise missiles, 384 total systems, launched simultaneously from 7 different sites across Iran and the Gulf Islands. The IRGC Aerospace Force commander who had designed Desert Veil had briefed the Supreme Leader with a presentation built around a single core calculation. The combined Saudi and American point defense systems at both target locations could engage a maximum of 140 simultaneous tracks. Desert Veil was presenting 384. The mathematics of saturation were not in doubt. Some weapons would get through. Enough to set Abqaiq ablaze, to crater Camp Arifjan's logistics infrastructure, to send a message to Riyadh and Washington that Iranian strategic reach extended to every facility, every base, every pipeline in the Arabian Peninsula. He had made 6 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: the 7 launch sites had been under continuous surveillance for 19 days. The NRO's satellite constellation, the NSA's collection against IRGC Aerospace Force Command network traffic, and a classified joint U.S.-Saudi intelligence sharing arrangement that had been operating for 31 months had collectively produced a threat picture of sufficient detail and confidence that both the Saudi Air Defense Forces and CENTCOM had been on elevated readiness since 48 hours before the launch. The Saudi Patriot batteries at Abqaiq had been supplemented by 2 additional batteries redeployed from Riyadh and Tehran. Camp Arifjan had activated its full shored posture and had pre-positioned additional Avenger short-range air defense systems at the facility's 4 critical infrastructure nodes. None of this had been publicly announced. None of it had been visible to IRGC reconnaissance. The second mistake: the Shahed 238 SS had been programmed with approach routes that took them across the northern Gulf at low altitude, a profile designed to stay below Saudi and Kuwaiti ground radar coverage at ranges where the Earth's curvature provided natural masking. The profile would have worked against ground-based radar alone. It did not account for the E-3 Sentry AWACS that had been orbiting at 31,000 feet over the central Gulf since midnight, providing full coverage of exactly the low-altitude approach corridors the Shahed 238s were using. The AWACS had detected the launch signatures of the first wave within 40 seconds of the first drone leaving its launch rail. By the time the Shahed 238ES had completed their first 50 miles of flight, the complete air picture, 316 drone tracks with high confidence classification, had been distributed to every air defense system in the theater. The third mistake: they had assessed the Saudi-US joint air defense architecture as a collection of independent point defense systems, each operating within its own coverage bubble, unable to coordinate engagement across the full threat picture. That assessment was accurate for the pre-2022 architecture. It was not accurate for the Joint Air Defense Integration Network, JADIN, that had been quietly implemented across the Saudi-US bilateral defense structure over the previous 26 months. JADIN linked every Patriot battery, every THAAD system, every Avenger launcher, and every Aegis-capable naval vessel in the theater into a single shared air picture with automated engagement deconfliction. It functioned as the theater equivalent of the cooperative engagement capability that had revolutionized U.S. Navy air defense in the Pacific. Individually, the air defense systems in the theater could engage 140 tracks. Networked through JADIN with automated engagement sequencing and deconflicted fire control, they could manage the entire Desert Vale threat picture. The fourth mistake: the Hoveizeh cruise missiles assigned to Camp Arifjan had been routed through Iraqi airspace on a low-altitude profile that their planners had assessed as below the coverage of U.S. radar systems in Kuwait. The assessment did not account for the AN/TPY-2 forward-based radar that had been deployed to Camp Bering in northern Kuwait 14 months earlier, specifically to provide early warning coverage against Iranian cruise missile approaches from the northwest. The AN/TPY-2 acquired the 18 Hoveizeh signatures at a range of 240 kilometers, providing Camp Arifjan's THAAD and Patriot batteries with a warning time of 11 minutes and 44 seconds. 11 minutes and 44 seconds was enough time for full engagement preparation, weapons assignment, and pre-launch verification across every air defense system protecting the facility. The fifth mistake: the 22 Shahed 149 reconnaissance drones providing battle damage assessment imagery were the highest altitude, most electronically active elements of the entire Desert Vale package. Each one was broadcasting a continuous video downlink on an encrypted frequency. Each one's transmitter produced an electronic signature that the EA-18G Growlers orbiting at altitude over the Gulf had detected, classified, and geolocated within 8 minutes of launch. The reconnaissance drones that were supposed to tell Tehran whether the attack was succeeding were broadcasting their own positions to the American electronic warfare aircraft that would vector intercept assets against them. The sixth mistake, the one that made the entire strategic concept collapse, was the assumption that the joint US-Saudi response would be limited to air defense, that it would be passive, that the two nations, having expended their defensive resources intercepting 384 incoming systems, would file diplomatic protests and absorb the strategic lesson that Iranian reach was real and consequential. That assumption had never been tested against the specific scenario of a mass drone and cruise missile attack on both Saudi critical infrastructure and a US military installation on the same morning. It had not been tested because no intelligence assessment had fully credited the possibility that the IRGC would attempt both simultaneously. Now it had been attempted. Now the pre-authorized joint response, developed over 18 months of bilateral US-Saudi military planning and approved by both governments at the level of Defense Minister and Secretary of Defense, was about to execute. What happened in the next 53 minutes rendered the IRGC Aerospace Force's offensive strike capability non-functional across the entire Arabian Gulf theater. The air defense engagement began at 4:58 a.m. and continued with mechanical, computer-managed precision for 31 minutes. The Patriot batteries at Abqaiq, now 6 batteries instead of the 4 the IRGC had planned against, began engaging the incoming Shahed 238 swarm at ranges of 80 to 100 kilometers. PAC-3 interceptors, 2 per target, working from the JADIN distributed track picture that assigned engagement responsibility by battery sector, fired in continuous sequence. The swarm was not approaching from a single vector. Desert Vale's planners had distributed the Shahed 238 launches across 7 sites specifically to generate a multi-axis approach that would overwhelm any single defensive position. Against 6 coordinated Patriot batteries sharing a single air picture through JADIN, the multi-axis approach became a geometry problem that the engagement algorithm solved in 0.6 of a second. In 29 minutes of continuous PAC-3 MSE engagement over Abqaiq and its surrounding defensive perimeter, 181 of the 216 Shahed 238s assigned to the Abqaiq attack were intercepted and rendered inoperable at altitude. 35 survived the PAC-3 engagement layer and entered the inner defense ring, where the Saudi Arabian National Guard's Avenger launchers and the facility's failing CYWS systems engaged them at ranges of 5 to 15 kilometers. 26 of the 35 were intercepted. 9 Shahed 238s impacted within the Abqaiq facility perimeter. 4 struck hardened structures without penetrating the reinforced walls. 3 impacted in open areas between processing units without structural consequence. 2 struck the outer fence of the No. 3 gas oil separation plant, damaging the fence and the road surface adjacent to it. No separation plant was rendered inoperable. No stabilization tower was damaged. The facility's processing capacity was not reduced by any measurable amount. The 44 Arash-2 weapons targeting the specific high-value aim points at Abqaiq were engaged as priority targets by the JADIN system. The larger radar cross-section and higher warhead yield of the Arash-2 made it a higher threat category than the Shahed 238. 31 of 44 were intercepted by PAC-3. 11 more were intercepted by Avenger and Phalanx in the inner ring. 2 reached their assigned aim points, 1 impacting on the road surface 50 meters from the main control building without penetrating the building's blast protection. 1 striking the outer structure of Stabilization Tower No. 4 in a glancing hit that caused superficial external damage. The tower continued operating. At Camp Arifjan, the 18 Hoveizeh cruise missiles were engaged by the THAAD battery and the Patriot PAC-3 batteries beginning at 5:07 a.m. The 11-minute 44-second warning time had been used to full effect. 14 of 18 were intercepted by THAAD in the upper tier. 4 reached the PAC-3 engagement zone and were intercepted before crossing the facility perimeter. 0 Hoveizeh missiles impacted on Camp Arifjan, the command infrastructure, the pre-positioned equipment yards, the power generation complex, all undamaged. All 4,300 American service members at the facility continued their duty day without a single casualty. The 22 Shahed 149 reconnaissance drones, having broadcast their positions to the EA-18G Growlers for the previous 22 minutes, were systematically engaged by F-15Cs from the Royal Saudi Air Force's 13th Squadron at Tehran, vectored by the AWACS onto the reconnaissance drones' known positions. All 22 were intercepted. Desert Vale's battle damage assessment capability was eliminated entirely before it provided a single usable imagery product to the IRGC Aerospace Force Command. At 5:29 a.m., the IRGC Aerospace Force commander in his hardened facility east of Hoveizeh received no imagery from his reconnaissance drones, no battle damage assessment, and no confirmation that any element of Desert Vale had reached its assigned targets in anything approaching its intended destructive effect. What he received, beginning at 5:31 a.m., was the joint U.S.-Saudi retaliatory strike package. The package had been pre-planned, pre-authorized, and pre-positioned for exactly this threshold event. From Tehran Air Base, 24 Royal Saudi Air Force F-15SA Strike Eagles launched at 5:31 a.m. Their targets were all 7 IRGC Aerospace Force launch sites, 4 on the Iranian mainland, 3 on the Gulf Islands. Each F-15SA carried 4 GBU-31JDAMS and 4 AGM-84HS LAMER standoff missiles targeting hardened storage bunkers, launch rail systems, and mobile command elements. From all UD'd, 8 USAF F-35As launched at 5:33 a.m. with JASSMER cruise missiles assigned to the IRGC Aerospace Force's 3 industrial backbone facilities: the Parchin Drone Assembly Complex, the Isfahan Engine Testing Facility, and the Hoveizeh Regional Command Center. From USS Baton's embarked Marine F-35B detachment, 6 aircraft launched at 5:34 a.m. to strike the Abu Musa and Greater Tunba Island forward locations. From USS The Sullivans in the Gulf of Oman, 16 Tomahawk Block 5 missiles were airborne by 5:36 a.m., targeting 2 Hoveizeh production facilities in Fars Province and the Avaz Airport Logistics Hub. The Slammer strikes hit the 7 mainland and island launch sites between 5:58 a.m. and 6:11 a.m. The Khuzestan Site 1, the largest, storing over 400 additional Shahed 238 airframes, produced a secondary detonation the AWACS crew described as the largest single explosion visible from 31,000 feet during the engagement. The F-35SA JASSMER strikes collapsed the Parchin Assembly Complex at 6:14 a.m. 4 facilities, 16 missiles assembly lines for both Shahed 238 and Arash 2 platforms gone. The Isfahan engine facility was rendered permanently inoperable at 6:17 a.m. The Hoveizeh Command Center received 6 JASSMERs at 6:19 a.m. The command module and communications infrastructure collapsing. The Avaz Airport Logistics Hub was struck by Tomahawks at 6:22 a.m. The F-35Bs completed the Gulf Island strikes at 6:09 a.m. Both facilities rendered inoperable. By 6:27 a.m., 1 hour and 29 minutes after the first Desert Vale drone left its launch rail, the joint U.S.-Saudi retaliatory package was complete. The final accounting was definitive. Desert Vale systems launched 384, intercepted or rendered inoperable before reaching targets 375, 11 impacts at Abqaiq, none degrading facility operational capability, 0 systems reaching Camp Arifjan, Abqaiq, fully operational, 7 million barrels per day maintained without interruption. Energy markets reversed their initial spike within 40 minutes of Saudi Aramco's operational status confirmation. Camp Arifjan, fully operational. 4,300 American service members, 0 casualties. IRGC Aerospace Force infrastructure rendered inoperable. All 7 Desert Vale launch sites, the Parchin Drone Assembly Complex, the Isfahan Engine Facility, the Avaz Command Center, 2 Fars Province Hoveizeh production facilities, both Gulf Island forward locations. Total, 14 facilities. Personnel having sustained casualties across targeted sites, assessed at between 290 and 340 based on SIGINT intercepts. Saudi casualties at Abqaiq, 0. 2 vehicles damaged by debris in the outer perimeter. American casualties at Camp Arifjan, 0. All 24 RSAF F-15As returned to Tehran by 9 a.m. All USAF F-35As returned to Al Udeid. USS Baton's F-35Bs recovered aboard by 8:30 a.m. USS The Sullivans undamaged. In Tehran, state media broadcast nothing about Desert Vale for 6 hours. The IRGC Aerospace Force briefing to the Supreme National Security Council, delivered by a deputy commander, described a successful operation. The satellite imagery, released by U.S. Space Command and Saudi Aramco at 8:30 a.m., told a different story. 14 IRGC Aerospace Force facilities across 3 provinces and 2 Gulf Islands, rendered inoperable in a joint operation that had been executing before Desert Vale completed its first wave of launches. The global energy markets closed that day at the same price they had opened. The 7 million barrels per day flowing through Abqaiq continued flowing. 4,300 American service members completed their duty day. This is what happens when you design a saturation attack around the mathematics of a defense architecture that no longer exists. This is what happens when 384 systems are launched against facilities that have been watching your launch sites for 19 days. Networked into a single air picture that your saturation attack was designed to overwhelm, and simply did not. The oil flows. The base stands. Abqaiq processed 7 million barrels on Tuesday. It will process 7 million barrels tomorrow.